everyone. Welcome to Senior Thesis Day 3. Wow, big stuff, all right? We've had some really great senior theses so far. We had some great ones last night, and we're going to continue to have great ones today. So we're going to have Colson Harms come to the stage and introduce our first speaker.
Hello, everybody. My name is Colson Harms, and I have the honor of introducing Kevin Bird tonight. Kevin Bird has been going to Annapolis his entire life and plans on attending Texas A&M Corpus Christi to study computer science. Everyone, please help me in welcoming Kevin Bird to the stage.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The previous sentence is the first line of the Declaration of Independence, the founding document of the United States of America. One can see where the document talks about a sort of higher power. So the United States was well aware of the mostly Christian populace that had deeply embedded Christian ideals, and the Founding Fathers were aware of this fact. It is seen how back in the Founding Fathers' day, the Christian populace would uphold their ideals, and as long as they are in governmental positions, the government would follow the ideals of Christianity. One must realize that a democratic government isn't a completely different organism than the populace. In fact, it is the populace which makes up a government. Thus it follows that the views, beliefs, and ideals of a populace will be reflected in the government of a democratic republic. However, the American population is now seen moving further and further away from Christianity. In a poll run by Pew Research Center, it was found that in the 1990s, around 90% of the Americans were self-professing Christians. However, today that number has fallen to a mere 63%, the implications of this being massive. It is sad to think that in just 30 years, the amount of self-professing Christians has dropped by 27% and is still dropping at an alarming rate every year. There is a shocking connection between the decline of Christianity in the American household and the prevalence of death culture, homosexuality, fatherlessness, violence, and much more. As stated earlier, within the 30 years between the 1990s and the 2020s, the amount of self-professing Christians has fallen by 23%. During this decline of self-professing Christians, death culture has skyrocketed. For example, the United States Census Bureau states that more than 1 in 4 children in America are without father figures in their households. Out of all the children without a father figure in their household, a staggering 92% of those fathers are imprisoned. Many negative attributes have been linked to children in fatherless homes by the National Fatherhood Initiative, such as the fact that a child without a father figure is 279% more likely to sell drugs than those who have a father figure in their life. The rate of poverty within single mother households compared to a household with both parents is staggering. The rate of poverty for families with both parents within this millennium is more than 4 times less than the rate of poverty within single mother households. The result of a missing father in a child's life is staggering. Children who grew up in single-parent households are more likely to do drugs, crimes, and sex in their younger lives, leading to working problems in their later lives. It is not just a disintegration of Christianity, but a disintegration of contemporary American society as well. Society is now seen falling apart to the seams with riots, lootings, mass shootings, abortions, wokeism, and a growing hatred for anyone holding a political opinion opposed to one's own. Even the government failing to function as was intended, a failing economy, consistently weak leadership, and an inability to compromise on any laws have plunged the whole of American life and culture into a modern dark age. How has this been allowed to happen? How is the greatest global superpower failing to this great of an extent? It is directly related to the earlier statement about the lack of Christianity in America. The disintegration of Christianity and society are 2 sides of the same coin. Because of the lack of Christianity, we have a failing government, and for the same reason, a failing society. The rate at which these problems are increasing is exponential, and at the same time, the rate at which the Christianity is decreasing in the United States is falling faster and faster. Now the question becomes, is the lack of Christianity due to the rises of evil, or the evil is the result of populace leaving Christianity behind? Somewhere along the line, where did it all go wrong? Was this because of a lack of Christianity, or because of a lack of something else? I stated previously, the amount of professing Christians in the United States has fallen dramatically. In the same Pew Research paper, they give possible reasons for why Christianity has been declining. One argument they give is that Christianity is being sided more and more with those on the political spectrum who identify as conservative, leaving people who are liberals to leave Christianity behind. The research also states that there is a declining trust in religious institutions and the fact that interreligious marriages are now more common. In a similar Pew Research paper, they go into more depth about the reason for leaving Christianity behind. In the study, around half of the answers for why they left their faith behind state that they simply do not believe. A lot of people who also answer this way would also say they believe in science and not in miracles. The American populace has declined from their original Christian morals and has drifted more and more to the secular side of the spectrum. This is due to the deconstruction of the core way of thinking that has guided humans for the entirety of history. Back in the medieval age, not being religious was very rare and frowned upon, but now secularism is becoming more apparent every day. In How Not to Be Secular, written by James K. Smith, he analyzes Charles Taylor's writings and provides insights and understandings of his propositions. Smith looks into Taylor's ideas, takes a dive into this exact idea of increasing secularism, and attempts to explain the fall of religion out of the common folks' everyday lives. He takes time to define secular in 3 different ways, but the definition to which this speech will use is his 3rd definition. Secular is Taylor's notion of the secular as an age of contested belief, where religious belief is no longer axiomatic, unquestionable. It's possible to imagine not believing in God. Smith observes that one of the reasons why atheism was unthinkable in the medieval era was because of 3 beliefs held by the majority of people. Those being, 1, the natural world was constituted as a cosmos that functioned semiotically, as a sign that pointed beyond itself to what was more than nature. 2, society itself was understood as something grounded in a higher reality. Earthly kingdoms are grounded in a heavenly kingdom. And 3rd, in some, people lived in an enchanted world, a world charged with presences, that was open and vulnerable, not closed and self-sufficient. All these facts line up to make the belief in God much higher than atheism, and as such, the vast majority of the world was not atheist. This wasn't the reason why theism spread. Theism was widespread because with these beliefs, atheism could not work. Taylor's writings state that for secularism to spread, these beliefs would have to be torn down to make the idea of even being secular to seep into the mainstream. Therein lies a problem. The populace has drifted away from the ideas that were firm pillars of life back in the medieval era. So then, what caused these pillars to be destroyed? While many reasons can be given as to why these pillars have been broken down, he focuses on what he calls reform. Reform is what Taylor believes is the ultimate reason for destruction. Reform, as Smith analyzes, is the want to undo the hierarchy of the age, to want to reform the way things have always been accepted as. He traces this idea back to the medieval era with the Protestant Reformation. The reformers wished to move away from the standard hierarchy that had been normal up to that point in time. This core want and desire to change the ideas and hierarchies that have been normal for long periods of time is what Taylor ascribes to the destruction of the pillars of theism. The Protestant Reformation opened the gates to allow for an idea of maybe, just maybe, being able to reorder the hierarchy of the church, which had been the case for many, many years. All that was needed was a newfound interest in creation and in the world. And the very same reformers who supported the Reformation now started to look once more at the world and creation, finally opening the floodgates to the possibility of an atheistic society and the destruction that follows. Now, the Protestant Reformation isn't the sole cause of secularism. Taylor merely uses the Protestant Reformation as an example of his reform. It is Taylor's reform mixed with the new want to re-examine the world through a new light that has caused the fall of the professing Christians. This speech is not a rebuttal of the Reformation. It is not claiming the Reformation to be the sole cause of secularism. This speech merely uses an example of reform which Taylor provides. In addition, Taylor says this wasn't a straight path, more of a zigzag, that the whole world didn't wake up one morning and leave God behind. There were high and low points. This sort of zigzagging allowed for the idea of secularism to be reasonable, yet still have a high number of self-professing Christians in the 90s. What would finally start the trend of decreasing the world would be in the Enlightenment period with philosophers like John Locke and Adam Smith. Taylor sees a shift from the outward world into the inward being as the start of the secular age. as now the individual no longer found meaning in being outside themselves, was now dependent on themselves. This, mixed with the reform Taylor was talking about, leads down paths of secularism. As he puts it, God's purpose begins to shrink. Now, one might argue that the rises of evil that caused the falling of professing Christians. The idea was that as the turn of the century occurred, more problems sprung up that dissuaded the populace from Christianity. Things like 9/11, the war in the Middle East, and the recession of 2008. These events could have been the last straw for many Americans who now turn to more secular beliefs. The counter-argument this speech will provide for this idea is in the latter half of the 20th century, Christianity was growing rather than shrinking. Even after the World Wars, the Korean War, and the Vietnam War, Christianity in the United States would reach a high in the 90s. And even before these tragedies, in Europe was prevalent during the medieval ages, and yet war and violence were even more commonplace. It is safe to say that wars and tragedies are not the reason for the lack of Christianity. Yet another argument one might make for the lack of Christianity in modern-day America can be traced back to ideas like Marxism. This idea is because Marxist culture and ideas are prevalent in today's society. And the thought process behind this argument is that since Marxism is in strong opposition to Christianity, and because it is so saturated in today's culture, has become the cause for the decline of Christianity. My response to this is that while Marxism has certainly not helped the problem, on the contrary, it has thrown gas on the fire, it still isn't the root cause of this problem. It is merely a byproduct of the destruction of the pillars of the old world, which Taylor expresses as the main cause. In conclusion, the shrinking of God's purpose and the want to reform led more and more ideas showing up that challenged the everyday norm. In doing so, aided in the growth of secularism. Ideas such as Marxism allowed for the idea of the world to become disinterested in the ideas of God, and eventually led to a society of this postmodern age. From the reform of the medieval church to the Enlightenment period, to Marxism, and finally to the woke culture apparent today, the belief of atheism and secularism as a whole has been a lurking monster, slowly growing more and more powerful, feeding off of humans' desires for reform and control, until it's become a beast so large it seems unbeatable. However, we know this beast will not win. Revelations 1:7-8 states, "Behold, he is coming with the clouds, and every eye will see him, even those who pierce him, and all the tribes of the earth will wail on account of him. Even so, amen. I am the Alpha and the Omega, says the Lord God, who is and who was and who is to come, the Almighty." We know Christ is coming back, and we have hope in that. However, there is still something we can do in our time to prevent the world from further secularism. If the world turned away from theism because of a disenchantment of the world, it follows that all is needed to re-enchant the world, to find beauty and meaning within it and outside of ourselves. So I'll leave you with this. The world must be enchanted once again, or the beast that is secularism will continue to grow and feed. The more people who re-enchant the world, the better it will become. Thank you.
Check. Okay. Thank you, Kevin. Good job.
Thank you.
Very good job. So my question for you is this. I actually had to read a book based off of Charles Taylor's writings for one of my seminary classes also, so I'm kind of familiar with his idea of secularism. But the book that I read particularly hones in on the American church and the state that we find ourselves in now in this like post-Christendom world. And in this book, the author kind of hones in on the baby boomers and blames it all on them. And, it's neither here nor there, but basically it started in the post-war economic boom with the baby boomers and continued with Gen Xers and now with millennials and Gen Zers and Gen Alphas. But where we find ourselves is this decreasing biblical literacy despite Bibles being everywhere. We find ourselves with consumer Christianity, where people are going to church, if they're going to church, just looking for religious goods and services rather than actually wanting to grow closer to the living God. And we also find ourselves with this idea of moralistic therapeutic deism, where Christianity is only a code of ethics. That's the moralism part, and the theism part is that God is far off. He's not an intimate, personal being close to us. or sorry, that's the deistic part. The therapeutic part is that God is just a Band-Aid for us. So my question to you is that in light of all of this, in light of this, the way that secularism has affected not only our society, but even the church here in America, your thesis is about the way out of that is re-enchantment. We need to re-enchant the church. And I was just hoping that you could provide some specific examples of what that looks like through discipleship and through evangelism.
Yeah, certainly. Enchantment of the world is finding meaning in being outside of oneself, the glory of God within creation, that it is not a closed circuit separate from God like deism. So it makes sense to, if you live the life and you see the world through an enchanted view, you can see God in a beautiful sunset or in ways he interacts with the world, because God does interact with our world. We can be a shining light of Christ, and through our example, others can see Christ through us. And I believe seeing Christ through us is a way to re-enchant the world, to open people's eyes to the fact that it's not self-sufficient, it's not closed, that God is within it.
Very good, thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. My question is, how do you think the advent of the computer age and the rise of synthetic realities through cyberspace is impacting humanity's appreciation and captivation by the beauty of the natural world? What implications are there for Christianity?
Yes.